It was late July, 1944. Over the skies of Manchuria, 3 American B-29 Superfortresses were limping home from a bombing raid on Japan. Their mission had gone as planned, until the fuel gauges began to fall faster than expected. Headwinds, damage, and the sheer distance back to base left them with one impossible choice: either ditch in the sea or find land. Captain Howard Garrell, commanding the Ramp Tramp, made the call. Ahead lay the Soviet Far East, neutral territory, but still friendly in theory. He turned the bomber north, radioed an emergency signal, and prepared for the unknown. Minutes later, the Superfortress touched down on a rough airstrip near Vladivostok. Smoke poured from engine number 3. The crew exhaled. They had survived. They expected to be refueled, to share a drink with Soviet comrades, maybe to fly home the next day. But no one came to help. Armed soldiers surrounded the aircraft. Orders were barked. Cameras clicked. The crew was escorted away without explanation. Garrell tried to reason. "We're allies, Americans." The Soviet officer didn't reply. He simply pointed toward the horizon. Unbeknownst to the crew, Moscow had already issued instructions. The USSR, though fighting Germany, still honored its neutrality pact with Japan. Under international law, the arrival of foreign combat aircraft had to be treated as a violation. The bombers and their crews were to be interned. The Ramp Tramp was only the first. Within weeks, 2 more B-29s, Ding Hao and General H.H. Artle Special, stumbled into the same trap. Fuel exhaustion, battle damage, or navigation errors pushed them across the same invisible line on the map. Each time, Soviet troops arrived with practiced precision, sealing the airfields and confiscating every camera, every logbook, every screw. From the American side, telegrams flew across the Pacific. Washington demanded the return of the crews and their planes. The Kremlin responded with polite silence. The war still raged, and no one wanted to start a diplomatic storm while both countries fought the same enemy. Officially, the airmen were guests under supervision. In reality, they were prisoners of circumstance. For months, they remained in isolation, moved quietly from one camp to another. Eventually, through secret negotiations, they were released to American custody in Iran. But their aircraft, 3 of the most advanced machines on Earth, stayed behind. The B-29 was unlike anything the Soviets possessed. Pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, 4 massive engines that could carry 5 tons of bombs across 5,000 kilometers. Its cost had exceeded that of the Manhattan Project itself. And now, 3 examples of this flying miracle stood in Soviet hangars under armed guard. Somewhere deep in the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin looked at photographs of the captured bombers. To him, they were not trophies. They were blueprints of the future. The Americans had crossed a border to save their lives. The Soviets would cross an invisible one to steal the technology that could change the balance of the world. News of the missing bombers reached Washington like a riddle. 3 of the newest aircraft in the American arsenal, gone without trace somewhere near the Soviet border. At first, the Army Air Forces assumed the worst: engine failure, weather, maybe even Japanese interception. Then came the whispers from intelligence outposts in Asia. The planes hadn't crashed. They'd landed in the Soviet Union. It made no sense. The USSR was a wartime ally. American convoys had carried thousands of tons of supplies to Murmansk. Pilots ferried aircraft across Alaska to help the Eastern Front. And now, apparently, Stalin's men were holding U.S. aircrews under protective custody. General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Air Forces, demanded answers through diplomatic channels. Moscow replied that the crews were safe, but would remain interned until the end of hostilities with Japan. As for the aircraft, Soviet officials explained they had entered Soviet territory without authorization and were being kept for security reasons. In the Pentagon, the mood shifted from confusion to alarm. The B-29 wasn't just another bomber. It was the centerpiece of America's air power. Inside those silver fuselages lay secrets worth billions. The world's first pressurized cockpit, computer-assisted fire control systems, and engines powerful enough to cross an ocean. The entire platform was classified at the highest level. Losing one was bad. Losing three to an unpredictable ally was catastrophic. By late summer, intelligence reports painted a troubling picture. Soviet engineers had been seen inspecting the captured bombers under heavy guard. No photographs left the hangars. American observers stationed in Vladivostok were barred from approaching the airfields. Washington feared the obvious: reverse engineering. Yet publicly, the U.S. could say nothing. Roosevelt's administration, then Truman's, needed Soviet cooperation to finish the war against Japan. The bombers' fate became an awkward secret, buried under diplomatic politeness. Meanwhile, far from the American radar, Stalin's personal circle began to act. In June 1945, only weeks after victory in Europe, the Soviet leader summoned Andrei Tupolev, the country's most brilliant aircraft designer. The meeting was brief. Tupolev was given a single order: copy the B-29. Exactly. No modifications, no creative interpretation. Every rivet, every circuit, every piece of aluminum had to match the original. Failure was not an option. American intelligence wouldn't learn about this command until years later through declassified Soviet archives. But in retrospect, it was one of the boldest acts of industrial espionage in history. Stalin wasn't asking to study the technology. He planned to rebuild it from scratch. In Washington, analysts still debated how the Soviets managed to advance so quickly after the war. No one imagined that behind those closed hangar doors, the world's most powerful bomber was being measured, dissected, and reborn under red stars. The Americans thought they had merely lost 3 aircraft. They had, without realizing it, delivered the blueprint of their own monopoly in the sky. When the war ended, the Americans went home believing the mystery of the lost bombers would fade into history. But deep inside the Soviet Union, the story of those aircraft was just beginning. Months later, U.S. intelligence officers stationed in Tokyo and Berlin began hearing strange reports. Trainloads of engineers moving east across Russia. Factories expanding in Kazan and Samara. Requests from Soviet trade missions for machine tools, aluminum, and precision instruments, everything needed to build a modern bomber. None of it matched the usual post-war reconstruction patterns. Then came the first solid lead. Satellite images, primitive by modern standards, showed a large object being transported under tarpaulins near Moscow. Analysts suspected a captured B-29. Some dismissed it as paranoia. After all, even with access to the airframes, copying such an aircraft was unthinkable. The B-29 wasn't a simple machine. It was a flying laboratory that had taken 4 years and $3 billion to perfect. Its skin was crafted from advanced aluminum alloys unknown to Soviet metallurgy. Its engines, the Wright R-3350s, were masterpieces of precision engineering that pushed the limits of piston technology. Its remote-controlled turrets were guided by electromechanical computers, a small taste of the coming digital age. And yet, in the summer of 1945, Stalin had given a direct order: reproduce it every inch in 2 years. To him, impossibility was irrelevant. American diplomats in Moscow began noticing subtle signs. Delegations of Soviet engineers suddenly stopped attending international conferences. Technical publications from Russian institutes vanished from circulation. The entire aviation industry seemed to have gone silent, as if under quarantine. In late 1946, a captured German scientist working for the US reported that a massive reverse engineering effort was underway in the USSR. His information came from a colleague transferred to a design bureau near Moscow. The project, he said, involved hundreds of designers and tens of thousands of workers. They were dismantling the B-29s piece by piece, converting every measurement from inches to millimeters. Even building new rolling mills to reproduce American-sized aluminum sheets. The detail that stunned analysts was the obsession with accuracy. One report claimed that Soviet engineers had discovered a small hole on the left wing of one bomber, a manufacturing defect from Boeing's Wichita plant. Unsure of its purpose, they asked Tupolev whether to omit it. The answer came straight from Stalin's office: copy everything. To American engineers reading these reports years later, it sounded absurd, almost comical. But it revealed something deeper: fear. In the Soviet system, precision was survival. Deviating from the order, even to correct a mistake, could be fatal. By the end of 1946, intercepted communications hinted that the prototype was nearly complete. Washington's intelligence agencies, then still fragmented before the creation of the CIA, scrambled to confirm it. No spy photographs surfaced. No witnesses escaped. Just one message from a diplomat who had glimpsed a shape on a distant runway. It looked familiar. For the Americans, it was an unsettling thought. Somewhere beyond the Iron Curtain, their most secret aircraft had been reborn in a mirror image, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The war for technology had begun, and this time, the battlefield was invisible. Spring 1947. American intelligence had grown used to fragments, rumors without proof, whispers from the other side of the Iron Curtain. But then, one of those whispers changed everything. The Soviets were preparing a test flight of something that looked exactly like a B-29. At first, Washington laughed it off. Even with blueprints, duplicating that bomber was a monumental task. It required alloys, hydraulic systems, and electronics the Soviet industry had never mastered. A copy might taxi down a runway, sure, but it would never fly. Until it did. On May 19th, observers at a diplomatic compound near Moscow reported a low, distant thunder. 4 engines roared across the horizon. Through binoculars, they saw a silhouette so familiar it froze them in place. A superfortress, glinting silver in the sun. The only difference was the red stars on its wings. Back in Washington, the dispatch arrived hours later. The message was short: Soviet heavy bomber airborne, B-29 design confirmed. It was met with disbelief. General Hap Arnold, now retired, was summoned to brief senior officers. The impossible had become real. The Soviets hadn't just stolen an aircraft, they had replicated an entire industrial miracle. More reports followed. Western attachés at the Tichino Air Parade that August described 3 identical bombers flying in formation over Moscow. For a moment, foreign dignitaries thought the Soviets were parading the captured American planes. But as the aircraft banked, sunlight revealed new serial numbers, freshly painted metal, and Soviet crews in the cockpits. The crowd roared. The message was unmistakable: we can do what you can do. Inside the Pentagon, analysts compared notes. The differences were minimal, a few kilograms heavier, minor changes in gun calibration, but essentially the same machine. NATO quickly assigned it a code name, Bull. To the Soviets, it was the Tu-4. What no one yet realized was that Stalin's engineers had already gone further. One version of the Tu-4 was being modified to carry a new kind of weapon, the RDS-3, the first Soviet atomic bomb designed for air delivery. It meant that the era of American invulnerability was over. A plane born in Wichita, Kansas, could now take off from Siberia and strike U.S. soil. For the American military, this was more than humiliation. It was a strategic shockwave. In less than 2 years, the Soviets had erased a technological gap that had cost the United States billions and defined its global dominance. Every assumption about distance, safety, and deterrence was suddenly rewritten. In congressional hearings, officials called it the most successful act of reverse engineering in modern history. But among the engineers who had built the original superfortress, the reaction was quieter, a mix of awe and dread. Somewhere in the skies over Moscow, their creation was flying again under another flag. They had set out to design the bomber that would win the war. Without knowing it, they had also designed the one that would start the next. For American strategists, the shock of the Tu-4's debut took time to settle. The first reaction was disbelief. The second was calculation. If the Soviets could copy the most complex bomber on Earth, what else might they copy next? Washington's analysts began tracing the ripple effects, not in the skies, but in Soviet factories, laboratories, and classrooms. Behind the Iron Curtain, the B-29 clones were more than military trophies. They had become a training ground for a new generation of Soviet engineers. To replicate a single bomber, the USSR had been forced to reinvent entire industries. Aluminum smelting, precision machining, avionics, metallurgy. What began as theft was transforming into transformation. American observers saw the evidence slowly emerge. Trade reports noted the sudden appearance of Soviet machine tools as sophisticated as those once built in Detroit. Western pilots, flying reconnaissance over Eastern Europe, photographed new aircraft with swept wings and turbojet engines. Designs that no longer looked like imitations. The copy had given birth to creators. In think tanks and congressional briefings, a new phrase began to circulate: technological parity. Until the Tu-4, the United States had believed its homeland untouchable. Its bombers could strike anywhere. None could strike back. Now, planners had to imagine something unthinkable: a Soviet aircraft crossing the Arctic carrying a nuclear payload. The age of one-sided power was over. By 1951, that nightmare took form. Over the testing fields of Semipalatinsk, a modified Tu-4A released an RDS-3 atomic bomb. 40 kilotons of fire, delivered from the sky. American radar stations picked up the flash within minutes. The USSR had entered the nuclear club, not with invention, but with imitation. Yet, as intelligence officers studied the results, a paradox emerged. The very act of copying had forced the Soviet Union to modernize itself. Their engineers, compelled to match American precision, had learned the methods that would soon produce original designs: the Tu-16 jet bomber, the Tu-95 turboprop, and the long shadow of a Cold War arms race. In Washington, the story of the lost bombers became a quiet lesson whispered among military engineers. Never underestimate the power of reverse engineering. 3 planes had been written off as wartime losses. Instead, they had triggered a global balance that would define the next half-century. For the Americans who had flown those missions in 1944, The memory was bittersweet. They had risked their lives against Japan, only to see their own machines reappear as the backbone of a rival's arsenal. But even they could not deny the scale of what had happened. The Soviets hadn't merely copied a bomber. They had copied an idea that technology could bend history. And history did bend. The Superfortress became the 2-4. The 2-4 became a doctrine, and the doctrine became the tension that divided the world. In the end, those three lost aircraft accomplished something no one had intended. They built the blueprint for an empire. If you followed this story to the end, thank you for watching. Subscribe, leave a comment, and explore more forgotten turning points that shaped our world.